Hey guys, what's up? Zyphon here, and in today's video, we are going to be talking about whether or not we think Caliban is a good or a bad frame. I've seen a lot of discussion on the Warframe Reddit, forums, and in Twitch streams, basically just discussing whether or not people like Caliban or dislike Caliban and different reasons why. And we're going to be talking about this from sort of just like his kit design perspective, right? Like what makes a good Warframe kit. So we're going to be talking generally, more or less, and just having Caliban sort of thrown into the discussion here and there. So straight off the bat, I'm a big fan of Caliban. I think that his kit is good. I think that he is a more well-designed frame than some recent frames, right? So for example, Ureli. I'm not the biggest fan of Ureli. I think her kit is utter garbage. Team of Grendel, I'm not the biggest fan of Grendel's kit. Some other examples would be Inaros. I'm not a fan of Inaros, and just a few other frames that sort of like fit that sort of scenario, right? Where most of their abilities are kind of like gimmicky or useless. From my perspective, Caliban's kit has a use, right? So his fourth ability has a permanent armor strip, and there's not many Warframe abilities in the game that allow you to permanently armor strip. And that is useful because permanently armor stripping, or just armor stripping in general, allows you to run viral, for example, right? Viral has increased damage versus cloned flesh, and then, it's just a damage bonus, right? The armor not existing on the enemy is a damage bonus in general as well. Now, I'm not trying to say that Caliban is a perfect frame by any stretch of the imagination, right? His first ability absolutely sucks. He turns into a Beyblade, he spins around, and he deals some amount of damage based off of the power strength that you've got on, right? Typically in Warframe, whenever we have a damage dealing ability which only scales off of power strength, it never does too well for the simple fact that it doesn't have anything else to sort of like take damage from. You think of some of the more appealing damage dealing abilities in the game, such as Spores, for example. It is casted and then the damage ticks up over time. Or you think about Mace's regulators, right? You have to actually equip mods and then they gain most of their damage from there, and then you can have power strength sort of as a bonus, right? So anytime that we get a Warframe who has a damage dealing ability and the only way to make it deal more damage is by modding for power strength, typically it isn't that good. In some scenarios, it can be all right, but usually it's not the best, right? The rest of his kit, I think, is pretty fine. So his second ability, you stump the ground. It's basically Rhino Stump, but then you make the enemies more vulnerable to damage, right? Which is pretty nice. It is a nice added benefit. DE could have just went and said, hey, you know what, we're just going to turn this into a crowd control. But because they sort of like read the room and they realized, hey, players like to deal more damage, we're going to go ahead and make it so that this frame's entire kit, more or less, is based around dealing damage and kind of staying alive, right? Now, whenever I say kind of staying alive, his passive is adaptation, right? You get adaptation built into the frame. And while that may not be useful for the likes of, let's say, a level cap run, because you're going to get one shot in there anyway if you're not paying attention to your Vazarin immunity, your rolling guard, and your shield gating, it's still a nice added benefit for casual gameplay, right? You're going to stay alive if you're playing Caliban, and you also have the added benefit of being able to make the enemies more susceptible to damage through your 2, crowd controlling them, and also using your 4 to totally strip their armor, right? And because it permanently armor strips in a large radius, I think this is a no-brainer of a good frame for that simple fact. And you could make the argument that, like, hey, Warframe is a casual game. But even if you do make that argument that Warframe is a casual game and, like, armor stripping isn't needed, that makes this frame even better whenever you use that argument or frame the argument in that way, for the simple fact that if it's a casual game, it doesn't really matter what frame you use, and Caliban can exist in that sort of, like, casual space as well. You know what I mean? I don't know, like, I think the frame compared to the likes of Ureli and the likes of Grendel is just far better because it read the room of the community, and the community likes to watch content on YouTube, at least, where they deal more damage, right? You'll see a lot of videos saying, hey, how I one-shot a level 9,999 enemy or something like that, and people love watching that, and Caliban sort of like just bleeds into that niche, you know what I'm saying? So I think Caliban is a pretty alright frame. His 1 could definitely use a little bit of work. You could definitely go ahead and make it so that he scales with the mods you have equipped to your melee, for example, right? And that would make the one infinitely better than it is now, right? Whenever it comes to other frames that come out, like, I think a frame is useful, or I think a frame is good whenever it is useful, right? And there's not many activities in the game where you have to like 110% use a certain Warframe, right? There are a lot of frames in the game which are good, don't get me wrong, but they're not necessarily like excelling at anything, for example, right? Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Nidus, for example, because of the whole stacking mechanic, but he does have some really good uses. You know, you can make some wacky builds with Nidus. Anaros, I'm not a fan of because I just don't think his kit serves any purpose outside of staying alive. But then if you frame that in that casual perspective, right, Anaros is totally fine to run. So it is a matter of perspective whether or not you think a frame is good or bad. I personally think that the likes of Ureli is bad because she serves absolutely no purpose. And I think even from a casual perspective, right, I don't think Ureli is that good because she just doesn't really fit with the game. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, you have these bubbles and you can hold 5 enemies in the air. And sure, if you really struggle with, just killing enemies in general, maybe holding them still like this by using Ureli's 1 is totally fine. But then we have other methods of doing that in the game, such as using lockdown, you know what I mean? Or you could use Rhino Stump, for example. Staying alive, you've got your whatever this thing is called, the glorified K drive, but you could use any other ability in the game which gives you damage reduction, right? You have frames that give flat damage reduction, you have Shatter Shield on Mesa, you have Iron Skin on Rhino, you have these Aqua Blades which deal pretty much no damage, to be completely honest. I mean, it's okay versus these guys right here because they're level 180, which, I mean, is higher than any casual content that you're going to get into the game. So I guess whenever you look at that casual perspective, this is totally fine. But there's other frames in the game which do this better. And then we have the 4th ability, which I think is all right. It's pretty cool, but I wish they would add a little bit more to the frame, right? If they took a second look at Ureli and they incorporated like viral procs, for example, like they made it so the 4 proc the viral on all the enemies, and then you can use your Aqua Blades, which are applying slash procs to follow up, and then they increase the damage of the 2 abilities in some way, shape, or form. I think that would make Ureli an infinitely more fun frame, or more viable frame whenever you compare it to the other frames in the game, right? So fun in her own sense to mess around with for a little bit because she's something different. But if I were to choose like any other frame in the game, I would choose the likes of Saren, for example, because Saren just does basically what Ureli does, but a lot better, even from a survivability standpoint, because of the likes of Mult, right? You can use Mult to shield get. And of course, that's a little bit more of an advanced mechanic than a casual player is used to. But it is still survivability in its own sense because you can strip away status effects, you can re-engage your shields, right, if you're using the likes of Brief Respite or Augur mods and stuff like that. And Saren's just a really great frame. So I don't know, whenever it comes to frame design, I'm not really too fussed anymore, for the simple fact that there isn't a lot of content in the game which requires a frame to do a specific role, right? So you play any MMO game, and like, admittedly, I don't play a lot of MMOs because I just find running around and questing kind of boring unless they are really well voice acted or something like that, and they're really, really, really engaging. Couldn't really stick to Final Fantasy 14 for what it's worth. So without like rules, or a game mode with rules within Warframe, it is hard to sort of like say whether or not a frame is good or bad, because from the casual player's perspective, Ureli is all right, you know, because she is going to be able to do up to story level content, and that is what most players are doing. She might not excel at killing the likes of Demolus, for example. Maybe we should use that as a benchmark. How easily can this frame set up a kill on a Demolus, right? Maybe that should be the benchmark that we should use going forward to determine how good or bad a frame is, because there are frames in the game which you can melt the Demolus with in no time, but then you have frames which basically have no effect on Demolus, right? So, but that could also be because of the Demolus nullifying effect. We get into a much broader conversation about frame design, and we end up bleeding into the likes of enemy design and other game modes and stuff like that. These frames existing in a vacuum, judging them on their own individual basis, every frame is all right, you know, and that is just kind of it. Like, all the frame releases are going to be mediocre. Caliban is okay. Ureli is kind of okay, I would say. I can't sit here with a straight face and say that Ureli is like a good frame, because I would never recommend to a player picking her up. But I can make arguments for Caliban, right? If I can make an argument for Caliban in some way, shape, or form, that's a frame worth picking up. I can make an argument for Revenant because you basically can't die. I can make an argument for Gara because you basically can't die and you have like infinite scaling damage. But I can't really make an argument for the likes of Ureli or Inaros, for example. So yeah, this is just a very broad topic or conversation that I can't really cover all in one video. Maybe it's a video that I should sit down and script, but I just wanted to sort of address it because a lot of people have been talking about, you know, whether or not Caliban is a good frame, whether or not Caliban is a bad frame. Does he need a rework? I think he's all right. I think he's good design. I think he serves a purpose in the game, and anytime a frame serves a purpose, anytime that you can just say, hey, this frame is all about this, I think the frame does okay. You know what I'm saying? So check it out. Strip them up. You see them, armor strip them, and they're all dead. So I don't know how anyone can call Caliban bad. Of course, I'm using a subsumed ability over the one, but the subsumed mechanic, the helmet mechanic, has been in the game for what, a year or two now? And so many people incorporate it into their builds. You can get it quite early into the game as well if you're, you know, if you know what you're doing. So it is kind of a no-brainer to me to at least like try to get another person's or another Warframe's thing on it, another Warframe's ability. But anyway, guys, that's going to be it for the video. Like it if you liked it, subscribe for more Warframe content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.